Humanity Strikes Back, the epic battle that changed everything. The echo of chains. The hum of alien machinery resonated through the damp metallic corridors of the Ardran warship. The air smelled sterile, tinged with an acidic sharpness that bit at the throat. In one of the many dimly lit compartments, rows of humans sat in silence, their eyes dull but alert, reflecting faint blue lights from the overhead panels. Dr. Elise Hart leaned against the cold wall, her fingers trembling as she clutched a jagged piece of metal hidden beneath her shirt. The shard wasn't much, just a broken piece of an Ardran maintenance drone, but it was sharp enough to cut through a fiber restraint or, in a desperate moment, an Ardran's exposed skin. She scanned the room, her sharp gray eyes taking in every detail. Most of the humans sat hunched, their bodies lean from malnutrition, their faces pale and streaked with grime. A boy, no older than 10, clutched a small carved figure in his hands. Elise recognized Alex immediately, his wide brown eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The little carving was all he had left of Earth, a crude wooden horse he'd made during the few moments of reprieve in their shared captivity. A heavy metallic clang echoed down the corridor, sending a ripple of tension through the group. The door hissed open, and 2 Ardrans stepped in, their tall, wiry frames draped in shimmering black uniforms. Their skin gleamed in iridescent silver, reflecting the dim light in swirling patterns. Captain Maven, the one with the deep purple streak running across her jaw, stepped forward. She was as cold as the ship itself, her thin lips curling into a slight smirk as she regarded the humans. "Today is a fortunate day," Maven said, her voice a lilting melody that belied its menace. "Your compliance has earned you an opportunity. The most industrious among you may yet avoid the purge." Elise's stomach twisted. The purge was a euphemism for the systematic disposal of humans deemed unproductive. It was a fate she had narrowly avoided by demonstrating her engineering prowess. She knew the reprieve was temporary, one slip, and she'd be next. Maven's violet eyes scanned the room, finally resting on Elise. "Dr. Hart," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Your expertise is required. Follow me." Elise hesitated, her gaze flicking to Alex. The boy met her eyes, and for a moment, the fear in his face was replaced by something stronger, trust. She pushed off the wall and stepped forward. "Of course, Captain," Elise said, her tone measured, betraying none of the seething anger beneath. The Ardrans led her through the labyrinth of corridors, past glowing panels and pulsating conduits that carried energy throughout the vessel. Elise studied everything, each pipe, each connection, every flicker of light. The ship's systems were advanced, but they weren't flawless. She had already identified weak points, like the maintenance drone ports that could be manipulated to access the ship's central AI. They entered a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and alien machinery. The room's centerpiece was a spherical console emitting a pale blue glow. Ardran technicians worked in near silence, their movements fluid and precise. Maven gestured toward the console. "Our energy regulators are experiencing inefficiencies. Fix them." Elise approached the console, her mind racing. This was her chance to study their systems up close. She ran her hands over the surface, the cool material responding to her touch with faint ripples. The interface was foreign but intuitive, and within moments, she was navigating its intricate layers. As she worked, Elise couldn't help but notice the arrogance of the Ardrans. They believed their technology was so far beyond human comprehension that they had grown careless. They hadn't anticipated that a human could not only understand but exploit their systems. An idea began to take shape in her mind, a plan so audacious it bordered on suicidal. If she could gain access to the ship's AI core, she might be able to create a backdoor into its systems. It would take weeks, maybe months, to fully implement, but it could be the key to freeing the humans. "Efficiencies restored," Elise said finally, stepping back. Maven studied the console, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she nodded. "Adequate. Return to your cell." Elise turned and walked out, her heart pounding. She had planted the seed of rebellion. Now, she just needed to nurture it. Back in the holding cell, Alex rushed to her side. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, his small voice trembling. Elise knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, they didn't. And they won't. Not forever." Alex tilted his head, confusion flickering across his face. "How do you know?" She glanced around the room, at the tired but determined faces of the captives, and then back at Alex. "Because we're human," she said softly, a spark of defiance lighting her eyes. "And they have no idea what that means. Fractures in steel." The air in the holding cell grew colder as the artificial night cycle settled over the Ardran ship. Most of the humans were huddled in the far corners, wrapped in thin blankets that offered little warmth. The dim glow of the overhead lights cast long shadows across the walls, their shapes twisting and curling like silent phantoms. Dr. Elise Hart sat cross-legged on the metal floor, her back pressed against the wall. She held the shard of metal in one hand, turning it over in her fingers as she studied its jagged edge. It wasn't just a tool anymore, it was a symbol of something greater. A spark. A possibility. Across from her, Alex sat with his knees drawn to his chest. The little wooden horse rested in his lap, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. He watched Elise intently, his wide brown eyes reflecting the faint blue light above them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Elise glanced up and smiled faintly. "About how machines break," she said, tapping the shard against the floor. "Even the best ones. They all have weaknesses." Alex tilted his head, curiosity replacing some of the fear that usually clouded his expression. "Like this ship?" "Exactly like this ship," Elise said. Her voice lowered as she leaned closer to him. "The Ardrans think they're invincible. But they're wrong. We just have to find the right crack to wedge ourselves into." The boy nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the wooden horse. "Do you really think we can beat them?" Elise's gaze softened. "I don't just think it, Alex. I know it. They don't understand what it means to be human. That's their biggest weakness." The door to the cell hissed open, breaking the moment. Elise quickly tucked the shard into her sleeve and straightened. Two Ardran guards entered, their silver skin catching the light like liquid mercury. Behind them, a third figure stepped into view, a human man. The sight of him made Elise's heart sink. It was Gavin, a fellow captive who had gained a reputation as a collaborator. His broad frame filled the doorway, and his eyes, once fiery with rebellion, now held a resigned coldness. "Elise," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk." She stood, her fists clenching at her sides. "I don't have anything to say to you." Gavin stepped closer, ignoring the murmurs of the other captives. The guards remained by the door, their sharp gazes sweeping over the room. "Listen to me," he said urgently, his voice barely audible. "I know what you're planning." Elise's blood ran cold, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Gavin's eyes darted to the guards and then back to her. "Don't play dumb. I've seen you studying the systems, asking questions. You're trying to find a way out." Elise crossed her arms, her mind racing. "And if I am?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to stop. They're watching you, Elise. They're watching all of us. And you're helping them," she shot back, her voice sharp with anger. Gavin's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I'm doing what I have to do to survive. You don't know what they're capable of." "I know enough," Elise said, her voice low and steady. "And I know that if we don't fight back, we'll all end up dead or worse." The tension between them crackled like static electricity. Around them, the other captives watched in silence, their faces etched with fear and hope. Gavin hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he exhaled and shook his head. "You're going to get us all killed." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cell, the guards following close behind. The door sealed shut behind them, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Elise sank back against the wall, her heart pounding. "Is he right?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. "No," she said firmly, though doubt tugged at the edges of her mind. "He's scared. That's all." Alex nodded, though he didn't look convinced. As the hours dragged on, Elise couldn't shake Gavin's warning. She knew the risks. Every move she made, every calculation, was a gamble. But the alternative, sitting in this cell, waiting for the inevitable, was a fate she refused to accept. In the stillness of the artificial night, she began sketching a plan in her mind. If the Ardrans were watching her, she'd give them something to see, something that would distract them from what she was really doing. The next step wouldn't just be about survival. It would be about sending a message. To the Ardrans, to the humans, and to herself. She would show them what it meant to be human. The seed of rebellion. The steady thrum of the Ardran ship pulsed like a heartbeat, a constant reminder of the alien control that surrounded them. Dr. Elise Hart moved through the labyrinthine corridors, escorted by a pair of guards whose polished, iridescent skin shimmered under the ship's dim lights. The walls seemed to close in on her, sleek and smooth, their surfaces devoid of any markings or imperfections. It was a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside her mind. She had spent weeks cataloging the ship's systems, memorizing every flicker, every hiss, every anomalous hum that might betray a vulnerability. The piece of scrap metal hidden in her sleeve pressed against her skin, a tiny but reassuring reminder of her growing defiance. When they arrived at the engine chamber, the door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a cavernous space dominated by a massive central core. The engine glowed with an otherworldly light, its shifting hues of blue and green casting eerie shadows across the walls. Ardran technicians moved with fluid precision, their long, slender fingers dancing across alien interfaces. Captain Maven stood at the center of the room, her posture rigid and commanding. Her violet eyes flicked to Elise as she entered, a faint smirk curling her lips. "Dr. Hart," Maven said, her melodic voice tinged with mockery. "I trust you've rested well. We wouldn't want your brilliance dulled by exhaustion." Elise swallowed her anger, forcing her expression to remain neutral. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice steady. Maven gestured toward a console near the engine core. "We've detected an irregularity in the energy flow. You will fix it." Elise nodded and approached the console, her heart pounding. This was her chance. She placed her hands on the interface, the cool material responding with a soft ripple of light. The data streams were complex, alien, but Elise had spent enough time studying them to navigate with relative ease. As she worked, her gaze darted to the maintenance drone ports lining the walls. They were small, unassuming openings, but Elise knew they connected directly to the ship's central AI. If she could find a way to exploit them, she might be able to plant a virus, a seed of chaos that could grow into something much larger. She reached into her sleeve and carefully slipped the shard of metal into the console's edge, wedging it into a hidden crevice. It was a small act, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to create a temporary fault in the system. A diversion. "Finished," she said after a few moments, stepping back from the console. Maven studied the readings, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "Adequate," she said, the word laced with disdain. "You may return to your quarters." Elise turned and walked toward the exit, her mind racing. The first step had been taken. Now, she needed time to prepare for what came next. Back in the holding cell, the atmosphere was tense. The other captives whispered among themselves, their voices low and uncertain. Gavin sat apart from the group, his face set in a grim mask. Elise approached Alex, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his wooden horse clutched tightly in his hands. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with questions he didn't dare ask. "Did you do it?" he whispered. Elise crouched beside him, lowering her voice. "The first part," she said. "But it's going to take more than that. We're going to need everyone's help." Alex frowned, his small brow furrowing. "Even Gavin?" She glanced at the man across the room, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Especially Gavin," she said. That evening, Elise gathered the captives into a quiet corner of the cell. The overhead lights dimmed as the ship entered its simulated night cycle, casting long shadows that provided some measure of privacy. "I know you're all scared," Elise began, her voice low but firm. "I am too. But if we don't act, this is how it ends. Trapped in these cells until they decide we're no longer useful." The murmurs quieted, and all eyes turned to her. "What can we do?" a woman asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "They're stronger than us, smarter than us. They have weapons. They have arrogance," Elise said. "They think we're predictable, weak. That's their blind spot. Humans adapt. We survive. And that's what we're going to use against them." She outlined her plan, her voice steady and deliberate. The maintenance drones would be their key to accessing the ship's systems. Elise would create a virus to disrupt the Ardran AI, sowing confusion and giving the humans a chance to strike. "It won't be easy," she warned. "They'll be watching us. We'll need to be careful, precise." The group was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over them. Then, to her surprise, Gavin spoke. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, his voice low. "But I'll help you." Elise studied him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. But his expression was sincere, his eyes hard with determination. "Why the change of heart?" she asked. Gavin's jaw tightened. "Because you're right. Sitting here, doing nothing, that's a slow death. If we're going to die, we might as well go down fighting." A ripple of agreement spread through the group, faint murmurs of approval breaking the silence. For the first time in weeks, hope began to take root. As the others drifted back to their corners, Elise sat down beside Alex. The boy leaned against her, his small body warm and reassuring. "Do you think it'll work?" he asked softly. Elise stared at the ceiling, her mind buzzing with possibilities. "I think we have a chance," she said. And sometimes, a chance is all you need. In the quiet darkness, she let herself believe it. Sparks in the dark. The maintenance corridor was eerily silent, save for the occasional hiss of coolant vents and the soft hum of the ship's energy conduits. Dr. Elise Hart crouched behind a cylindrical energy regulator, her breath shallow as she waited for the patrolling Ardran drone to pass. Its smooth insectile form glided through the corridor, its glowing sensor array casting an eerie green light across the walls. The moment it turned the corner, Elise darted forward, her footsteps muffled by the padded soles of her stolen Ardran boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, heavy with the tang of ionized energy. She reached a narrow maintenance panel embedded in the wall, her fingers moving quickly to unscrew it using a makeshift tool she had fashioned from scrap. Behind the panel lay a tangle of wires and conduits, pulsating faintly with energy. It was an alien configuration, but Elise had spent enough time studying it to understand its basic function. These conduits connected to the ship's auxiliary control systems, the perfect entry point for the virus she had painstakingly crafted. Her heart thudded in her chest as she removed a small device from her pocket, a crude combination of human ingenuity and stolen Ardran components. It was the culmination of weeks of scavenging, tinkering, and near misses with the ship's security systems. She connected the device to the conduits, her fingers trembling as she activated it. The screen blinked to life, its human interface overlaying the alien data streams. Lines of code scrolled across the display, the virus embedding itself into the ship's system. "Come on," she muttered under her breath, her eyes darting between the device and the corridor behind her. A faint beep signaled success, and Elise allowed herself a small smile. The virus was in place, a dormant program waiting for her command to awaken and disrupt the Ardran AI. It wasn't enough to disable the ship entirely, but it would create confusion, enough for the humans to exploit. She secured the panel back into place and slipped the tool into her pocket, ready to retreat to the holding cell. But as she turned, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Captain Maven. The Ardran's violet eyes glinted with amusement, her tall frame blocking the narrow corridor. Behind her, two guards flanked the passage, their weapons trained on Elise. "I wondered how long it would take you to try something foolish," Maven said, her voice laced with condescension. "Humans are so predictable." Elise's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "If we're so predictable," she said, her tone steady, "why are you watching me so closely?" Maven's smirk faltered, just for a moment. She took a step closer, her shimmering skin catching the faint light. "Because even vermin can cause chaos when they're cornered. And you, Dr. Hart, are particularly resourceful for a pest." Elise's mind raced, searching for a way out. The shard of metal in her sleeve pressed against her arm, a faint comfort. She glanced at the guards, their sleek weapons humming softly, and then back at Maven. "What now?" Elise asked, lifting her chin defiantly. "Now," Maven said, "you'll explain what you've done to my ship. And if you're very, very cooperative, I might consider sparing a few of your people." Elise clenched her fists, anger boiling in her chest. "You think we'll just keep bowing to you? You think fear will stop us?" Maven tilted her head, studying Elise like a predator sizing up its prey. "Fear always stops your kind. That's why you've survived as long as you have." The captain raised a hand, signaling her guards to seize Elise. As one of them stepped forward, a sudden crash echoed from the far end of the corridor. The sound was followed by a blinding flash of light, and the ship's lights flickered violently. Elise took her chance. She drove her elbow into the guard nearest to her, her movements swift and desperate. The alien stumbled, its weapon clattering to the floor. She grabbed the shard from her sleeve and slashed at the exposed joint in its armor, a spray of shimmering fluid marking her success. The second guard lunged, but Elise darted under its grasp, adrenaline lending speed to her movements. She sprinted toward the source of the disruption, the virus she had planted already showing signs of its effect. Panels along the walls sparked and fizzled, and the hum of the ship's systems grew erratic. Behind her, Maven's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Stop her! Contain the breach!" Elise didn't stop. She didn't look back. She raced through the corridors, her lungs burning, her legs aching, until she reached the service hatch leading back to the holding cells. She yanked it open and scrambled through, sealing it behind her just as the sound of approaching footsteps grew near. Inside the cell, the other captives stared at her, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. Gavin stepped forward. his expression grim. What happened? He demanded. Elise leaned against the wall, catching her breath. The virus is in place, she said, her voice ragged. But they know we're up to something. We don't have much time. The murmurs grew louder, panic threatening to spread. Alex tugged at her sleeve, his wide eyes brimming with worry. What do we do now? Elise straightened, her gaze sweeping over the group. We finish what we started, she said firmly. The virus is just the beginning. If we hit them hard enough, fast enough, we can take control of this ship. Gavin frowned, crossing his arms. And if we fail? Elise met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we fail fighting. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Slowly, one by one, the captives nodded. In the flickering light of the failing systems, a spark of rebellion ignited. The sound of fury. The Ardran ship groaned like a wounded beast, its once precise systems now spasming under the strain of the virus. Lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows across the walls of the holding cell. Alarms wailed, a chorus of sharp alien tones that reverberated through the cold metal corridors. Dr. Elise Hart stood at the center of the cell, her back straight and her voice steady despite the chaos outside. Around her, the captives huddled in tense clusters, their faces a mixture of fear and grim determination. This is it, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The virus is destabilizing their systems. Their focus will be on containment. That's our chance to move. Gavin stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared. And you're sure this will work? Elise nodded. It has to. The virus is designed to create a feedback loop in their control grid. If we time this right, we can disable the door locks and get to the armory before they regroup. Gavin's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned to the others, his voice gruff but steady. You heard her. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't stop moving. The group moved to the cell door, a heavy slab of reinforced metal that had once seemed impenetrable. Elise knelt by the control panel, her makeshift tool in hand. Sparks flew as she pried open the casing, revealing a tangled array of wires and circuitry. Her fingers worked quickly, guided by weeks of observation and trial and error. The door shuddered, then slid open with a reluctant hiss. Beyond it, the corridor stretched out like a labyrinth, dimly lit by the erratic glow of the failing systems. Elise motioned for the group to follow, and they slipped into the corridor, their footsteps muffled against the metallic floor. The air was thick with tension as they moved, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of discovery. Alex clung to Elise's side, his small hand gripping hers tightly. The boy's wooden horse was tucked into his pocket, a talisman against the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Ahead, the path forked into two corridors. Elise hesitated, her mind racing. The left corridor led to the armory, but it was also the more direct route, more likely to be guarded. The right corridor was longer, winding through maintenance accessways, but it offered better cover. She turned to Gavin. Take the others down the right corridor, she said. I'll create a distraction on the left. Gavin frowned, his gaze hard. You can't go alone. I can and I will, Elise said firmly. We don't have time to argue. Get them to the armory, and I'll meet you there. For a moment, Gavin looked like he might protest. But then he nodded, clapping her on the shoulder. Don't do anything stupid. Elise smirked faintly. No promises. As the group disappeared down the right corridor, Elise turned and sprinted down the left. The walls seemed to close in around her, the distant sound of footsteps growing louder. She skidded to a stop near a junction, her eyes scanning the area for anything she could use. Her gaze landed on a cluster of energy conduits running along the wall. Without hesitation, she yanked a loose panel from the wall and began severing the connections with her shard of metal. Sparks showered her hands, the sharp smell of burning insulation filling the air. The conduits exploded in a burst of light and sound, the force throwing Elise against the wall. Alarms blared louder, and a section of the corridor plunged into darkness as the energy grid failed. She pushed herself to her feet, her ears ringing, and ran further into the chaos. Behind her, the heavy clatter of Ardran boots echoed through the corridor. The guards had taken the bait. Elise rounded a corner and ducked into a maintenance alcove, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding as the guards passed by, their weapons glowing faintly in the dim light. When the sound of their footsteps faded, she slipped out of the alcove and doubled back toward the armory. Her body ached, and her hands were raw from the explosion, but she didn't slow down. Every second counted. At the armory, Gavin and the others were already prying open the heavy doors. The smell of sweat and fear hung in the air, but their movements were precise, their desperation giving them focus. Elise joined them, adding her strength to the effort. With a final groan, the doors slid open, revealing racks of alien weapons and armor. The group hesitated, awestruck by the sight. "Don't just stand there," Elise said, grabbing a weapon and shoving it into Gavin's hands. "Arm yourselves, now." The humans moved quickly, stripping the armory of its contents. Elise picked up a weapon that felt almost too large for her hands, its design sleek and unfamiliar. She glanced at Alex, who was struggling with a smaller weapon, and knelt beside him. "Here," she said, adjusting his grip. "Just hold it steady. You don't have to fire unless you need to." Alex nodded, his face pale but determined. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped Elise's attention back to the corridor. "They're coming," she said. "Get ready." The group formed a loose line, their stolen weapons raised. The flickering lights cast their faces in sharp relief, a patchwork of fear and resolve. The first wave of Ardran guards appeared, their sleek forms moving with predatory grace. But the humans didn't hesitate. A volley of energy blasts erupted from their weapons, filling the corridor with deafening noise and searing light. Elise fired alongside them, her heart pounding with each shot. The recoil jarred her arms, but she didn't stop, didn't falter. For the first time, the captives were no longer prey. They were fighting back. The corridor became a battleground, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burned metal. The Ardrans, unprepared for such resistance, faltered under the assault. One by one, they fell, their bodies collapsing in pools of shimmering fluid. When the last guard went down, the humans stood in stunned silence, their weapons still raised. The realization of their victory washed over them. A mix of disbelief and exhilaration. Elise lowered her weapon, her arms trembling from the effort. She looked around at the group, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, their eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and fear. "We did it," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in their ears. Elise placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "We did this," she corrected, looking at each of them in turn. "But it's not over." "Not yet." She gestured toward the corridor ahead, where the ship's core systems lay. "We've got to push further. The bridge is our next target. If we can take control, we can end this." Gavin stepped forward, his weapon slung over his shoulder. "You heard her," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Let's move." As they pressed onward, the group moved with a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer prisoners. They were survivors, rebels, warriors in the making. And as the sound of their footsteps faded into the smoke-filled corridors, the Ardran ship shuddered once more, its alien systems groaning under the strain of a rebellion it had never anticipated. The fall. The bridge of the Ardran ship was a stark contrast to the rest of the vessel. The room was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling arching like a cathedral of cold, alien technology. The walls shimmered with translucent panels that displayed complex, flowing data streams. At the center stood a raised platform surrounded by consoles, glowing faintly with hues of blue and green. Captain Maven was there, her tall form silhouetted against the pulsing light of the ship's main interface. Her violet eyes blazed with fury as she barked orders in the musical tones of her native language. Around her, a handful of officers worked frantically to stabilize the failing systems, their long fingers dancing over alien controls. The ship shuddered violently, and Maven turned to her second-in-command. "Reroute power from non-essential systems," she commanded. "Seal the central corridor." But the ship's AI, infected with Elise's virus, refused to obey. The panels flickered and stuttered, the data streams breaking into erratic patterns. Maven's jaw tightened, her composure slipping as the chaos mounted. A sudden crash echoed from the corridor outside, and Maven spun toward the sound. The doors to the bridge buckled, their reinforced metal groaning under the impact of human ingenuity and desperation. Another crash followed, and then another, each strike shaking the room. With a deafening screech, the doors burst open, revealing Elise and the other captives. They stood silhouetted in the smoky haze, their stolen weapons raised, their faces set with grim determination. "Stand down," Elise shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "This ship is ours now." Maven's gaze locked onto Elise, her expression twisting with a mixture of disdain and rage. "You dare to challenge me?" she spat. "You are nothing more than scavengers, clinging to scraps of defiance." Elise stepped forward, her weapon aimed steadily at the captain. "You made a mistake," she said, her voice cold. You underestimated us. The room erupted into chaos. The humans surged forward, their weapons blazing, while the Ardrins fought to hold their ground. Energy blasts crisscrossed the bridge, their light reflecting off the gleaming surfaces. Elise dove behind a console, narrowly avoiding a blast that scorched the air where she had stood. She fired back, her shot striking an Ardrin officer who collapsed in a spray of shimmering fluid. Gavin charged another officer, his brute strength overpowering the slender alien. He wrestled the weapon from its grip and delivered a decisive blow, his face a mask of fury. Alex, small and quick, darted through the chaos, his stolen weapon clutched tightly in his hands. He fired sporadically, his shots more distraction than precision, but his bravery inspired the others. The bridge was a cacophony of sound and light, the walls trembling as the virus continued to wreak havoc on the ship's systems. Sparks rained down from overhead conduits, and a high-pitched whine signaled the imminent failure of the main interface. Maven, now backed into a corner, bared her sharp teeth in a snarl. "You cannot win," she shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "Even if you take this ship, the Ardrin fleet will come for you. They will annihilate your pathetic resistance." Elise leveled her weapon at the captain. "Maybe they will," she said. "But not today." Before Maven could react, Elise fired. The energy blast struck the captain squarely in the chest, and she crumpled to the floor, her violet eyes wide with shock. The remaining Ardrins hesitated, their resolve wavering. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The humans closed in, securing the bridge and disarming the alien officers. Elise climbed onto the central platform, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked around at the captives, her comrades, and then at the subdued Ardrins. "We did it," Gavin said, stepping up beside her. His voice was gruff, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. Elise nodded, her gaze sweeping over the bridge. The ship was theirs, but the victory was bittersweet. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. She turned to the central console, its flickering light casting her face in sharp relief. Her fingers hovered over the controls, hesitant. This ship was a weapon, a symbol of the Ardrin's dominion. In their hands, it could become humanity's greatest hope, or its greatest burden. "What now?" Alex asked, his small voice cutting through the silence. Elise looked down at him, her expression softening. "Now," she said, "we go home. And we show them what happens when you push humanity too far." As the ship's engines roared to life, the humans stood together, their battered bodies and indomitable spirits a testament to their resilience. The stars stretched out before them, a vast and uncertain expanse. But for the first time in weeks, they were free. And they were ready to fight for their place in the universe.